Hey, welcome, Katherine. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me, Eva. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I was so excited when I read about you for the first time. You're the national lead for communications and engagement at the National Guardian's Office. And you're also a freedom to speak up writer. So obviously, I was so excited about that. You've written a lot and done a lot of work and research around speaking up in organizations. You're the author of Encouraging a Speak Up Culture and Communicating Ethical Values Internally, which is something that we're going to be chatting about, a little bit about your findings from that report that you wrote. And you were also previously the head of communications for the Institute of Business Ethics. It ties in really nice with this whole aspect of speaking up and ethics. There's a lot in common. And yeah, and it's interesting because when I looked up at the mission of the National Guardian's Office, it's making speaking up business as usual. And I know that it started off with the UK healthcare system, and healthcare is one of the places where when people don't speak up, it can lead to patient deaths and really bad things. So I'm very excited to have you here.
Thank you, Eva. Yeah, the stakes are really high in healthcare, aren't they? If people speak up and they're not listened to. And so that's why it's a real privilege to work for the National Guardian. So the National Guardian's office was established because as a result of some tragedies at a hospital in the UK called Mid Stafford Hospital, where they found that people didn't speak up, and as a result there were terrible tragedies, and they didn't speak up because they were either too frightened to, or they thought if they did nothing would happen, or they felt that nothing would happen. And so the National Guardian and the Freedom to Speak Up Guardians were established as a way, a sort of impartial way for people to speak up to someone locally to them who would empower them and enable them to get their voices heard. And so Guardians, they work both within their organisation, supporting people, but then they also proactively challenge their leadership and share themes of what's being spoken up about as an ambassador to help improve the culture. So a big job on, and so I think we're about 7 years in now. So really seeing that there are benefits to that role, but also that it doesn't work in isolation and really needs leaders to support it proactively and set the tone and really show that speaking up matters to them. Yeah, a privilege to work, especially during the pandemic when so much speaking up was happening, and how difficult it was in that kind of time of high pressure for people to get their voices heard. But yeah, a great privilege to work with them. But the good practice guides you mentioned about speaking up cultures and communicating ethical values, that work was with the Institute of Business Ethics. And yes, you're right. I think you can't really have an ethical culture if people can't speak up about ideas for improvement, things they see going wrong, or just even to make inquiries. You can't build an ethical culture without the freedom to be able to speak up about anything, can you? I think that's at the crux of it, really. Why being able to speak up safely and supportively really is at the heart of any ethical organization, which is easier said than done, isn't it?
It
Really?
is. It is. It's really hard to implement. Like you said, it's scary for a lot of people, or they believe nothing's going to come out of it. How did you get into this? So you mentioned a little bit about how, as a child, as a little girl, you weren't really encouraged to speak up much, and
Well,
obviously now you're an advocate of speaking up. So what changed?
well, it's interesting, isn't it? It might be a generational thing, of course. Obviously, listeners to your podcast can't see quite how aged I am. I'm from that generation where if you told your mum that something had happened, they would tell that your mum would say, "Don't tell tales." And I think about it often actually when I was writing the good practice guide about encouraging a speak up culture. My child at the time was about 7 or 8, and they had a friend round, and the friend came to see me, and she said, "Oh, Tilly is flooding the bathroom, and she's put all the taps on, and she's plugged the thing, and there's water everywhere." And I found myself thinking, "Oh, what a tattletale this girl is." When really, let's transpose this into a work environment. Wouldn't you think I would be really grateful that to have this early warning system this girl come to tell me that the bathroom's about to be flooded, and I can take action swiftly to avoid expensive repairs. And that's what fascinates me, actually, is why wouldn't you encourage and be welcoming of when people speak up to you about any issues they have, because it is your early warning system. It's your opportunity to put something right in healthcare before somebody may lose their life. So that's why it's such a difficult thing to change as a manager, not to take it personally, but just to take it as the information you're being given, that gift of information that you wouldn't have known otherwise. You'd be glad to know that I quickly corrected myself and went, thank you very much, and sorted out the bathroom. But it's that this is information, and actually we should, as managers, think this is a gift of information, and you say thank you when you get given a gift, don't you? And it's not personal. It may feel personal, may feel that you're being challenged as a manager, isn't it? That you're something you've done wrong, you're not doing your job properly. But actually, this is a bit of an opportunity to put something right. I think that's why ethics, organizational ethics, fascinates me so much too, because it's all about those grey areas, isn't it? And I think as a writer, grey areas, humanity, that's what we're here for, isn't it? It's what fascinates us. Yes, that's it in a nutshell, really. So it hasn't really changed, but I've learnt to modify my own behaviour. And actually that's why I welcome the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter. This is all us as a society, I believe, learning to speak up. People that hadn't been heard before, our voices are being heard, and that to me, I think, is as we're changing as a society. So we're stopping seeing people who speak up as snitches, and actually being seen as, we're changing that story, and we're celebrating people who are bringing things to our attention, whether that's as a society or as managers in organizations. So obviously it's a learning curve, isn't it, for everybody?
It is a learning curve, because typically most employees, even the really good ones, avoid being a messenger of bad news, because they, what they read, what they hear about is, okay, if you're going to deliver bad news, you already have to come with a solution. But just coming in and delivering bad news is going to contribute to your demotion. And
it's interesting, that, isn't it, that it's bad news, isn't it? We hear that a lot, having bought people that run organizations. I don't want to hear anything bad. Come to me with solutions, not problems. And actually, if you want to create an organization that's improving all the time, sometimes it will be a sticky problem that they might need you, especially if you're a manager of a team, a leader of a team. They want your input. You're their leader. So it's fascinating, that, isn't it? Because that's why at the National Guardian's Office we talk about making speaking up business as usual. Because although it does take courage, and it shouldn't be underestimated, the amount of courage it can take to challenge things. If you're making it just a conversation, I noticed that you're cutting the wrong leg off there, or I noticed that this is happening, and somebody says, oh gosh, you're right, or thank you for that, or no, I don't think so, and I'll explain to you why not. It becomes less risky, and it's taking the risk out of these conversations so that it is normal everyday practice. Why wouldn't you say that doesn't seem right to me? But of course it depends how your manager or your leader receives that information, doesn't it? So if you come to somebody and say, I don't know how to do this, and they bite your head off, you're never going to come to them the second time, are you? And when it's a massive problem, I know it's a silly analogy, but my bathroom's being flooded, and if that little girl had said to me, oh, she's flooding the bathroom, and I said, oh, for goodness sake, just don't bother me, I'm cooking the dinner. She'd never tell me the second time when my daughter had set fire to the curtains. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it could get worse and worse. And it's hard to understand as a manager sometimes how much power, just by your sheer position, you hold, and how the weight in your words can be. And I suppose it's having that awareness of those barriers that we may present to people. So we always like to think of ourselves as quite approachable. I'm sure, Eve, you have a lovely smile, and I'm sure that, all of your colleagues, you'd like to think that you're a really approachable person. I know I'm like to think that of myself, but actually I have to reflect. Actually, I'm an older person, I'm a manager. I may present a barrier to somebody, no matter how approachable I am, because they know that I do their appraisal at the end of the year, or what. So it's bearing in mind that just by our very nature as leaders, we may present some barriers. So how do we break those down for people? And I think really it's how you receive when somebody does speak up to you, but it's about being present and listening to people even when they're just saying hello to you. I think, I don't know about you, but have you been in meetings where someone more senior than you, and it's especially now we're doing lots of things remotely, and you can tell that they're reading their emails and they're not fully present, and you think someone like that, they probably don't really want to hear about my concern that I can't back up with evidence about something that's going on in that other department. So it's that kind of like listening well and then acting on what you hear, which is sometimes the hardest bit, especially as a manager, that you may hear something and go, okay, I need to escalate that. Then you have to speak up as a manager to your manager, and in order for it to be shown that actions are taking place and that speaking up is worthwhile. So it's fraught with stumbling blocks all along the way, isn't it, speaking up?
It is. And it's even the smallest things that managers, leaders do that signal, even if they don't bite their head off. I think it's even a small look up, eye roll, or that sigh of impatience for someone who is sensitive. That's all they need to not want to come back, because they know that promotions are competitive and they want to distinguish themselves as someone who is bringing value, who is perceived as a value-adding individual. And if your manager is doing anything that gives a hint that speaking up is actually not highly valued as much as working on an important project or showcasing positive results, and people are just going to prioritize other things. They're not going to, like you said, that they're not going to take the risk.
So it's up to us as managers to share stories openly of times that either we've spoken up or that people have spoken up to us and what's happened. And I'll share a story. It's not my story. It's actually,
I love stories.
It's a story of, it's my sister's story. And this is a good 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago now. She's a young police officer, and she had a sergeant who was, now this is pre-Me Too. He was basically sexually harassing her, but it was just with banter, chit chat, but it was making her life a misery. And she was about to go on holiday, and her colleague said to her, you can do three things. You can do nothing, you can talk to him, or you can report him. And she went away on holiday and she thought about it, and she thought, you know what, I'm going to talk to him, and then if it doesn't help, I'm going to report him. I am going to do something. And if nothing happens, I'm just leaving. And she came back off holiday, and he's there saying, oh, tell me, have you got any white bits? You're going to show me your white bits from being on holiday. And she said, can I have a word with you? And they went and had a chat, and she told him how his comments were making her feel. And he went ashen-faced, and he said, I did not realise that. I'm so terribly sorry. And it's come up, it's in my mind now, because she's just told me she's just been to his retirement party, and he went on to become a really successful police officer, really highly regarded as a team leader, a great manager, who spoke openly about, he never named her, but he talked about a colleague who challenged his behaviour and how that changed him completely. Changed the way he managed, changed everything about him, and led him to be the successful officer he became. And obviously he never named her. He talked to her privately in his retirement to say, thank you, that conversation you had with me made the world of difference to me. And of course, the knock-on effect to us as a society, to that police force, in the fact that they held on to a great officer like my sister, is immeasurable. We can't measure how many lives have been saved by the fact that we didn't lose a great officer, and that this guy actually flourished in his career, became a great manager, managed people well after that. That it's that kind of like, this butterfly effect that can happen from raising your concern, making that change, being the change you want to see in the world. I know this is a positive story, and not everyone has that kind of great experience, but it's stories like that give me hope. And one of the things we do at the National Guardian's Office is we're collecting together 100 voices, which is stories from people who've spoken up to their Freedom to Speak Up Guardian and the change that happened as a result. And it's that kind of, we want to change that story there is that if you speak up at work, it's going to be a disaster. Only badness will happen. You'll lose your job, you lose your friends, you'll never work again. To show actually, if we can help people to speak up and empower them, change can happen as a result, not just for that person, but it means that by speaking up, we can look at processes, for example. We can look at some things that might need to be changed and make for improvements. That actually speaking up is not just about complaining, it's about making things better, not just for you, but for everybody. And it's that changing it from speaking up and whistleblowing, being all about like drama, danger, to being about an everyday thing that just makes life better for us all. But that is the challenge as a manager, to take this as feedback, and feedback being a gift. That can become I'm not the best. You have to prepare me to receive feedback. So it's always difficult. But if we can just take it as that, take the personal out of it, that this is for us all to improve, why would we not want that? Why would we not want to be the best team as a result of this information? So if you're speaking up about something that you think could be improved, because why else would you be saying it? That shouldn't be career limiting, should it? It shouldn't stop you getting promoted. It should be the thing that your manager says, thank goodness that Eden pointed that out, because now we're the highest selling team, or what have you. It gets more complicated, of course, when you're exposing wrongdoing and people don't like to be exposed if they've had a good cushy number. But that's where your organisation should be supporting you, because you think, why would they not want to know about a fraud? But that can take courage. When you're speaking up against your colleagues or your friends, that cannot be almost more difficult than speaking up to somebody in power, in a way, can't it?
Yeah, and as your brilliant sister story illustrates, sometimes people are actually well-intentioned and they want to do the right thing. They just need someone to openly share with them their personal experience. And your sister apparently did it in a very thoughtful way. She didn't accuse him. She said, hey, these actions, these specific actions you're doing, this is how they make me feel. And that's all he needed to realize that that wasn't right, that he needed to change. And sometimes things can be, I believe that they can be easier than we think they are, even though sometimes they're really hard, especially if the other person is intentionally trying to do something wrong.
Yeah.
That's the hardest.
How do you challenge that when you know that they know that it's not the right thing to do? But I would say that if they know it, then they maybe in a way want to be challenged in a way to stop them. I don't know. But that's something that is, as an organisation, you definitely want to know about that, don't you? So that if you speak to the person and they say, no, don't be ridiculous, everybody takes 5 iPads and gives them to their family. That's not right. But you should be able to say that to somebody. I'm worried because there's taking 5 iPads. Other tablets are available to steal, fraudulently, of course. But that's where organisational speak up arrangements are so important, because, of course, that does protect the organisation. And so as a manager, of course, you want to be able to have someone come to you and say, I don't want to get anyone into trouble, but I've noticed this and this is happening. And then as a manager, you should be able to act to stop that, because, of course, that would reflect badly on you. But if you've already shut someone down who's raised something before, you're never going to know about that fraud that's happening in your department. It's so small. I think it's Brené Brown who says something about kind of it's the small things, the everyday things that build a culture. And that's it. If you shut someone down who's asked you something innocuous, then they're not going to tell you the big things.
That's true. No, not at all. What are some of the findings from these collection of 100 voices that you found? I'm really interested. And is there a way to read some of these stories?
So you can find them on the National Guardian's Office website, which is nationalguardian.org.uk. And we're looking to collate 100 of them at least, but with one day we'll maybe get to 1,000. But really, it's quite interesting. So the main takeaway really is that especially in healthcare at this current time, people feel hopeless, that there's things that they can speak up about that are systemic problems. So not enough staff, for example, staff sickness, things that you would think, actually, I speak up about that, what's going to happen? The IBE research shows that the people that don't speak up, the reasons they give is a third of them think it's because it might jeopardize their job, and another third think it's because nothing will happen. And when you're dealing with kind of a massive kind of nationwide funding issues and overstretched because of post-pandemic, you could think yourself as a team of nurses, for example, that you couldn't make it, that you'd go to your manager and say, we're understaffed, there aren't enough of us, and nothing would happen because there aren't. How are they going to magic staff up? But actually, by speaking up, that change can happen. It may not be the 500 extra people you want or what have you, but things can happen as a result, and to make sure that your well-being and the well-being of everybody actually is taken care of. And so it's that really, that actually there's nothing too small that someone might speak up about and make a difference. There's an amazing story. One of my favorite ones is a lady who worked in the administration, and she noticed that all the printers there were all different types of printers, and you had to order a different type of printer ink, and each printer ink, how expensive the printer inks are. And it meant that because there were so many printers, that they had to have all these extra inks available. They did this audit of the printers as a result of this worker speaking up and saying, I don't think this is right, we could save more money. And they managed to save about £250,000 just in this one audit, because this lady said, this doesn't seem like a great use of money. And then following that, they then did a whole audit of stationery and how it's ordered, and they've saved millions. They've saved a good £1,000,000. And you just think, actually, if no one's good idea is too small to make a difference. And it's that thing that somebody could speak about their personal situation, and actually, because of the way Freedom to Speak Up Guardians work, they look at the themes of what people are speaking up about. And that one situation could actually mean that process isn't really helpful. So let's change that or tweak that. And then it can be more helpful for people in the future. And I think it's my key takeaway, really, is that if something doesn't look right, or if something could be even better, speak up, because it'll change things not just for you, but for the people that come after you.
Yeah, no, I agree. It really makes a difference. And it's inspiring to hear those stories. And I'm curious about, and I think a lot of our leaders and organizations would be curious about, what does the work around these Speak Up Guardians look like? What are they doing on the day-to-day to really help employees speak up more?
So there's two parts to their role. So there's the reactive part, which is where people come to them in confidence and talk to them about something that they'd like to raise. And then the Guardian can either signpost them to where they can get help, or they can ensure that something's escalated so that change happens. And then the other part of their role is the proactive. So they raise awareness about speaking up and the routes available, because the Guardian isn't the only way you can speak up. And so they do awareness raising campaigns, but they also go and speak to staff groups, for example, for different cultural groups, or say the LGBTQ staff groups, to encourage people who you might consider may feel more vulnerable if they spoke up, to encourage them and to show the routes available to them. And then they are great kind of networkers. So they will be able to facilitate conversations between people who may not speak to one another normally, so that they can get stuff to happen. So there's a fixer in that regard. And then they report to their senior leadership. So they will collect data about the people that speak up to them, and they will share those themes and those stories to their leadership. Now, I do think that kind of boards of organizations have a governance responsibility for the culture of their organisation. And how are you as a board member going to know what that culture's like if a meeting once a quarter in your C-suite, nice office with nice cups of tea and biscuits, if you're not listening to people who actually are in touch with people on the ground? And that's what Guardians can do for their leadership, is they can tell them what people are saying. So they have that courage, and it's one of their core values, is that courage, because they speak truth to power, and they have to do it respectfully. All that work that you do, Eve, now on speaking up and to get your voice heard. They are very special people, I think, because they have to do so many different things. Some of them do it on top of another job, so they may be clinicians as well. And yeah, so I have nothing but admiration for the work they do, because I'm sure no 2 days are the same.
Yeah, no, and it requires a lot of skills to be able to do
Mm,
that effectively, to facilitate those conversations, help people out when they have issues, encourage and be a spokesperson around
mm.
speaking up, and talk to senior leaders and make them aware of what's happening and express how important it is
Yeah,
when sometimes they're not. It's a lot.
it is a lot. And I know also, especially these have been tough times for healthcare workers. So Freedom Speak Up Guardians may be sitting with people in the very darkest points of their career, and listening with empathy. And yeah, they are special people.
Very special people.
Mhm.
And regarding your report, encouraging a speaking up culture and communicating
Mm.
ethical values that you did, what are some of the key insights or some of the key things that you wrote about that you would like to share? I think it's important for organizations and leaders to know.
Yeah, so I suppose it's interesting because we've actually spoken about one of them, which is about the stories that we tell. And we've talked about, when it comes to speaking up, that making sure that we talk about speaking up and the difference it can make and how that's welcomed. And I think, because I think we're storytelling creatures, that's how we learn, that's how we understand the world. And but what I do reflect in kind of both of those good practice guides is that you can talk all you like, actually, but actions speak louder than words. And so there's no, as a leader, if you say, we don't tolerate retaliation or detriment, if you speak up, it'll be fine. If you say that with one breath, but in the next breath you're telling your HR director, we don't listen to them, they're a troublemaker, then you're not going to get the outcomes that you want. And so I think it's about walking the talk as a leader. And that may mean actually physically walking the floor, being available, being visible, and saying, "Hi, how are you? Everything okay with you? How are you really doing?" But I think it's just by our actions, that's how you really create the culture that you want. So if you want to hear what's going on, you need to listen. And by listening, that's how, and then by acting on what you hear, then people will know you really do value what they're saying to you.
Absolutely. Listen and act. Brilliant. And my last question for you is around the conversations on the National Speak Up Month campaign that you did with the alphabet of Speak Up. What were some of the insights that you got from those conversations?
Oh wow. Every year in October we hold a Speak Up Month, which is an opportunity for Guardians to come together and raise awareness nationally about speaking up. And the alphabet of Speak Up was our idea to get not just Guardians involved, but also the wider stakeholders within the healthcare system. So we had each letter of the alphabet, which was crazy when I look back on it, because that meant like 26 days of activities, and we asked different people to adopt a letter. So they ranged from talking about anonymity to, when we went down to Z, to be talking about the zeitgeist and how speaking up was of our times. But it's just always great to get people thinking throughout, especially a healthcare system where there's so many different bodies involved, so many different organizations, about what speaking up, what that means to them, but also the part that's played by regulators and government, and how everyone has a part to play in fostering this culture in healthcare. So it's just so important that as regulators, that they also are listening to the people that work for them and the people that speak up to them, who may be workers in the system. It's about making speaking up not just something that happens over there that we outsource to a guardian, say, or if you're an organisation, to your Speak Up hotline. It's not something that happens somewhere else. It's what happens in all of our workplaces, in all of our teams, every day, big or small. And October's a great time to focus on that and talk about what speaking up means to all of us in all our work.
Why October?
I don't know, it predates me. I think it might be the anniversary for when the National Guardian's Office and the role was established. But it fits in between There's so many, honestly, isn't there? There's so many awareness days and months. It's hard to pick one that nobody else has used.
That's true. That's a good criteria. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your personal, speaking of stories, your and your family, your sisters, but also what organizations can do, the work that you've been involved in as well. Love it. Many fresh ideas. I'm inspired.
Thank you for having me.